Chapter 10, Socio-Emotional Development in Early Childhood. Today we're going to be talking about some of the characteristics of young children's emotional and personality development. Starting with personality development a little bit here, we're going to talk about development of the self. So we briefly talked about this with infancy, where we talked about the mirror test. We talked about Erikson a little bit. So we're continuing our conversation with Erikson. The stage that children are in preschool years, according to Erikson's theory, is initiative versus guilt. So according to Erikson, in early childhood, children must discover what kind of person they will become. On their own initiative, children at this stage explore their social world and use their own skills to make things happen. Guilt is the governor of initiative, and guilt may lower self-esteem. Now it is important for kids to learn that they can exert power over themselves and the world. They need to try things on their own and explore their own abilities. If children are made to feel bad for their mistakes, or if they are punished for asking too many questions, they might begin to feel guilt. So an example of this, I think this might be in your textbook, what would be a child that wants to make a gift for mom's birthday. So, at preschool age, they still aren't very capable with their fine motor skills, and they may make a mess. They still can't make the best decisions, so maybe they make a whole mess of the whole kitchen trying to make mom a gift, and mom comes home, and instead of seeing the gift and being excited, she yells at the child for making a mess of the kitchen. And again, the same thing when we talked about Erikson and infancy. This happening every now and then is understandable, of course, and won't damage the child from one instance. It's just the parents that consistently do this, that consistently make the child feel bad for mistakes and punish them for asking too many questions. That's when they'll start to develop guilt. Self-understanding. According to Erikson, the young child has begun to develop self-understanding, which includes a representation of self and the substance of self-conceptions. Although young children mainly describe themselves in terms of concrete, observable features and action tendencies, they begin to include psychological and emotional traits and self-descriptions by around 4 or 5 years old. So instead of just saying, I have brown hair, this is my bike, they might say things like, I'm a nice person. And then understanding others. Children also make advances in their understanding others in childhood. If perspective taking is the social cognitive process involved in assuming the perspective of others and understanding their thoughts and feelings. So being able to do this allows them to understand what other children might be feeling and take others' feelings into consideration. Okay, so with emotional development, we do have some continuing changes here as well. So first, with expressing emotion, self-conscious emotions such as pride and guilt become more common, often directly influenced by parents. So saying things like you should feel bad for hitting your sister, or hanging a piece of their art on the fridge will cause them to feel those kinds of self-conscious emotions. Guilt for, you should feel bad, and pride for hanging the piece of art on the fridge. In early childhood, children show an increased ability to talk about emotion and an increased understanding of emotions. They understand that certain situations are likely to evoke certain emotions. So they understand that getting a new toy is likely to make a child happy. Facial expressions indicate certain emotions, so they start to understand that if someone's frowning, it probably means they're upset about something. And they also understand that emotions can be used to influence others' emotions. They also show a growing awareness that they need to manage their emotions to meet social standards. So they start to understand that they can't just start screaming in the middle of the store because they didn't get their way. And this goes back to learning about how to be in school too, because at this age they are in preschool. So there's certain rules in preschool. You can't just do whatever you want based on your emotions, which leads us to regulating emotions. Important to the development of social competence is regulation of emotions. And again, we talked about this in infancy. Basically, this is just where the physical development of your brain, of these brain regions, is still developing, which gives the child the ability to control their emotions. Your textbook talks about emotion coaching and emotion dismissing parents. So emotion coaching parents monitor children's emotions and view negative emotions as opportunities for teaching, whereas emotion dismissing parents view their role as to deny, ignore, or change negative emotions. Emotion coaching parents are less rejecting and more nurturing than the emotion dismissing parents. Peers also play a role in emotion regulation. So moody and emotionally negative children experience greater rejection by their peers, whereas emotionally positive children are more popular. So it's kind of like conditioning children. Once they're in school and around other children most of the time, if they're being rejected because they're constantly in a bad mood, they're constantly crying, then they're not going to have as many friends as the children who are generally happy. So that kind of conditions them to express more positive emotions. Okay, now we're going to talk a little bit about gender. So before we begin talking about gender, I want to be sure you're clear on the difference between the term sex and the term gender. So sex refers to the biological differences between males and females. So if you remember from the beginning of the textbook, there was a section on chromosomes, and we know that the 23rd pair of chromosomes determines the sex of the fetus. So if you have an XX, that's female, and an XY is male. This leads to different hormones that are secreted, which leads to the development of either male or female physical sex characteristics. Whereas gender refers to the characteristics of people as males and females. Gender identity involves a sense of one's own gender, including knowledge, understanding, and acceptance of being male or female. Most children know whether they are a girl or a boy by age 2.5. So again, just to be clear, sex refers to your biological sex. And even that's not straightforward, but just to keep it simple for the purposes of this class, um, when I say sex, I'm talking about your biological sex, and gender refers to your gender identity of being male or female or something else in between. So you can be born biologically a female, but you identify as a male as your gender. And again, most children know whether they're male or female gender by age 2.5. So we've already talked about the biological influences on gender, so we're going to talk about a couple other theories. But just to reiterate, the biological theory on gender is that when you have those chromosomes, so you have the XX, which means you're going to be a female sex, then that leads to the release of certain hormones that lead to the production of female sex organs, which may make you identify gender-wise as female, and the whole idea is because of those hormones, because of your physical development. So let's talk about some other theories. So the social theories on gender, there are three main social theories on gender that have been proposed. So the first one is called the social role theory, which states that gender differences results from the contrasting roles of women and men in society. So women hold less power and status than men, thus they have developed more cooperative personalities. The main idea is that the social hierarchy and division of labor are important causes for gender differences. And then we have the psychoanalytic theory of gender, which stems from Freud's view that young children are sexually attracted to opposite sex parents. Um, this view is generally discredited today, but I just wanted to throw it in here because it's in your textbook. The idea is that at this age they reject the attraction to the opposite sex parent and begin to identify with the same sex parent and adopt their characteristics. And then the social cognitive theory of gender suggests that children's gender development occurs through observing and imitating what other people say and do, and through being rewarded and punished for gender appropriate and gender inappropriate behavior. So of course we have parental influences here. Many parents encourage boys and girls to engage in different types of play and different types of activities. Fathers are more likely than mothers to act differently toward their sons and daughters. So a good example of this, if you've seen Friends, the episode where Ross, his son has a Barbie doll toy and he gets really upset about it and tries to make the son play with like a G.I. Joe or a dinosaur or something. So that's a good example of a parental influence because they were trying to give him, or Ross was trying to give him boy toys and was trying to reward him for playing with quote unquote boy toys and punish him for playing with a quote unquote girl toy. And parents do that all the time with the types of toys that they choose to buy, with the decorations they put in the child's room, the colors that they dress the child in, the type of clothes they dress the child in, how they speak to the child, how they interact with the child, all those little things. There's differences between male and female children. And then there's also peer influences. So peers extensively reward and punish gender behavior. Though there is greater pressure for boys to conform to a traditional male role than for girls to conform to a traditional female role. So it kind of is similar to how parents act with children. When a child is at school, of course, peers are going to notice if they're doing something that's quote unquote a boy or girl activity that doesn't match their sex. So they're going to react to that in some way. So it's more acceptable for girls to be tomboys and play boy activities and dress more like boys, but it's less acceptable for boys to be more feminine. Gender influences the composition of children's friend groups as well. They spend more time with same-sex peers. It also influences the size of friend groups, so boys are likely to hang out in bigger groups than girls are. And it also influences the interactions within those friend groups. So boys are more likely to roughhouse with their friends and have more competitions with friends than girls are. Okay, and then lastly, we have the cognitive influences. Under this one, we have gender schema theory. Gender typing emerges as children gradually learn gender schemes of what is gender appropriate and not appropriate in their culture. A schema is a cognitive structure, a network of associations that guide an individual's perception. So we talked about this before. So think of it as like a little boxes in your brain that you stuff information in. So you have a box in your brain labeled girls and a box in your brain labeled boys. And in those boxes, you filed away information about how boys and girls are supposed to act, dress, talk, etc. So children start doing this at this age. Children are motivated to act in ways that conform to those gender schemas. So if a child has in their girl box in their brain, they have that girls wear dresses and they are polite and they're not loud. And the boy box, they have the boys wear pants and they roughhouse and play with trucks. Then they're going to act in those ways, that whatever's appropriate for their sex. Okay, next we're going to talk about parenting styles. So there's a list of parenting styles here on the screen that are talked about in your textbook. The first one is called authoritarian. This is a restrictive, punitive style in which parents exhort that the child follow their directions and respect their work and effort. This places firm limits and controls on the child and allows little verbal exchange. Basically, you can think of this one as my way or else. There's no explanation for rules. There's strict punishment for breaking the rules. These types of parents often spank their children. Children are often unhappy, fearful, and anxious and they compare themselves to others a lot. This type of parenting style is linked to higher levels of externalizing problems, such as acting out. Then we have authoritative. This encourages children to be independent, but still places limits and controls on their action. These parents have a verbal give and take that is allowed, and the parent is often warm and nurturing to the child. They often comfort the child and discuss how they can improve their behavior in the future. These children are often cheerful, self-controlled, and self-reliant, and often more pro-social than other children. Then we have neglectful. This type of parent is uninvolved in the child's life. The child believes that other aspects of their parents' lives are more important than they are. The child is often socially incompetent. They have poor self-control and don't handle independence well. This type of style is also correlated with externalizing problems. And then lastly, we have indulgent. These parents are highly involved with their children but place little demands or control on them. They let their children do whatever they want. These children always expect to get what they want and never learn to control their behavior. They likely will grow up to have social issues. Authoritative parenting is linked with more positive child outcomes than the other types of parenting. But again, as I will say multiple times in this class, this is culturally dependent. So in all cultures, authoritative parenting isn't necessarily the most favorite type of parenting or the one that you'll see most often. And even in the US, this has changed. So I would say that in the past, authoritarian style of parenting would have been more popular than it is now. Okay, and then lastly, what forms of punishment are most effective? So research shows that spanking or other forms of physical punishment are not effective, mostly because this instills fear and avoidance in a child. It can also lead to accidental abuse. And also the child learns that whenever they get upset about something, violence is the answer. So according to the text and authoritative parenting, punishment, you should speak to the child about what exactly they did wrong, why it's wrong, and what they can do to fix their behavior in the future, and do it in a gentle and understanding way. Okay, let's talk about peers and play. So this is the first time in the child's life that they are outside of the home and can use social comparison. Because think about it, in infancy, the child is mostly at home with parents or siblings all the time. And now that they're in preschool age, they're going out into the world. They're going to preschool. They're around other children their age. So social comparison is just talking about comparing themselves to children their age. And they can receive feedback about their abilities in a setting that's outside the home and outside of mom and dad. So children start to develop meaningful friendships, mostly based on who there is to play with, who is nice, and who will share. Children who are withdrawn or aggressive are at risk for delayed socio-emotional development because they're not able to form friendships. Play becomes a very important part of physical, cognitive, and socio-emotional development. So on here I put, why should play be included in preschool? So there's a couple reasons. It helps improve motor skills and develop muscles. It gives them exercise. It helps with problem solving. It helps with learning assimilation, language development, developing schemas and practicing roles. It also helps increase creative thought. It helps form peer relationships, and it also helps to learn about cultures other than their own as well. Preschool children tend to participate in practice play, which involves repetitive behaviors such as jumping or bouncing a ball. Eventually, they start to display symbolic and social play, which involves playing with their peers in imaginary scenarios, such as pretending that a laundry basket is a car. Okay, and the last thing we're going to talk about is screen time. So preschool age children should only have 1 hour of screen time a day. Screen time includes things like watching TV, using computers, phones, or tablets. Many parents let their kids watch TV. 21% watch more than 5 hours a day, and many kids spend a lot of time playing on apps as well. So think about what kind of effects you think this has on children. With physical, it means that less time is spent in play and exercising, so they're not developing gross motor skills. This is screen time early in life is linked to obesity later in life. For cognitive, screen time is linked with lower levels of cognitive development, and for socio-emotional, it's linked to less time spent in interactions with family and peers. They're not learning how to interact with others. They're not learning how to read facial expressions, and this can possibly lead to more aggression later in life. I have some videos on this linked on Blackboard that you can kind of watch and learn about some of the most recent research in this field. So it's important for the hour of screen time to be spent viewing something that promotes learning, that promotes physical activity, and promotes social and emotional development. So Sesame Street is a really great option for children this age. Again, just an hour a day. So they shouldn't be watching TV more than an hour a day. They shouldn't be on a phone, on a laptop, on a tablet. So there's lots of like learning type games, but what research is finding is that these are actually not beneficial. So they really need that one-on-one contact with the parents, some kind of caretaker, rather than trying to learn a language on an app or something like that. It's just not the same. So far the research is showing that it doesn't have the same benefits as talking to a person one-on-one. So just an hour, something like Sesame Street that teaches them different language stuff. It teaches them how to interact with others, and they even have physical exercise moments in the show where it encourages the kid to get up and dance or something like that. And I have an example of that on Blackboard as well. But that is the end of our lecture for today.